Welcome back to Nature Documentary for Sleep. If you enjoy these late-night landscapes, leave a comment and consider liking and subscribing. Tonight, you're walking the rim of the white cliffs of Dover, where the edge is always moving. It's pre-dawn. The wind is pushing inland, and the sea sounds closer than it looks. Salt settles on your lips as you follow a footpath that has already been nudged away from yesterday's boundary. Under your boots, the rock is chalk, a quiet mass of compressed plankton, bright and breakable. Down on the shingle, each tide arrives with tools, forcing air into cracks and dragging pebbles like sandpaper. You notice fresh white streaks where something recently peeled away and small stones ticking down the face. This week's spring tides will lift the wave attack zone higher, right into old joints and hidden seams. So what actually fails first here? Hydraulic pressure at the cliff foot, or saturation along a marl layer that turns chalk into a slip plane? You think the cliff is a wall, a dependable border. But the edge you are following is more like a question mark, redrawn by weather. The wind keeps leaning into you, patient, as if it has nowhere else to be. Far below, the channel keeps breathing, slow and heavy, like an animal that never fully sleeps. You take another step and feel the ground give, not collapsing, just softening. Not mud, not sand, chalk that has been crushed into powder under countless boots, then compacted again by rain. A tiny sag in the path tells you something important. The cliff top is not the cliff. It is the future beach, still waiting for its appointment with gravity. A gust slides in harder, and you hear it, a dry skittering sound. Somewhere nearby, a pebble has started its career as a falling object, then another, then a faint tick, tick, tick down the face, like someone tapping a pencil on a desk you cannot see. Within a few paces, you find the first concrete proof that the night has been busy. A new crack, thin as a drawn line, crosses the path toward a fence post. The post is still upright. The soil around it is not. A small wedge of turf has dropped by the thickness of your boot sole, cleanly, as if the land exhaled. You stop, and your body does what bodies do near edges. Your shoulders tense, your toes curl inside your shoes. You look toward the sea, but the sea is not the threat right now. The threat is the quiet rearrangement under your feet. There is a decision sitting in front of you, pretending to be a stroll. You can keep to the official path, closer to the rim, because it is the shortest way. Or you can detour inland, following the newer line of trampled grass where other people quietly admitted fear. The inland route feels safer, which is exactly why it is suspicious. Safety here is usually temporary, like a calm face on a storm. You choose the inland detour, and you do it slowly, like you are negotiating with something that does not speak. As you shift away from the edge, you notice the scallops in the cliff line. Each notch is a bite taken from the same meal. Each little headland, each little recess, lines up with the angle of waves that arrive on windy days. The cliff is being edited, line by line, by a sea with excellent attendance. The sky begins to lighten, and Dover starts to exist behind you. Not the romantic Dover, the working Dover. Road noise, distant engines, a low metallic clank from somewhere down by the port. Even at this hour, you can feel the constant human urge to move things across water, and the constant geological urge to move land into it. You come to a viewpoint, fenced, with a sign that uses friendly words for violent outcomes. Keep back from the edge, unstable ground, falling rocks. It reads like a polite request. It is actually a confession. The fence is not here to protect you from the sea. It is here to protect the council from your optimism. The wind shifts, and for a moment, the sound of the surf changes texture. It goes from a soft hush to a heavier shove. The tide is still down, but the sea is already practicing for later. You walk along the fence line, and your eyes keep dropping to the face below. Fresh white streaks stand out like new paint. Old scars have dulled to gray, stained by rain, algae, and exhaust drifting from ships. But the new chalk is bright, almost glowing in the dim light. You are looking at a wound that has not had time to gather dirt. A gull floats close to the cliff, then lifts away, offended by invisible air currents. It is circling something you cannot quite locate, a fracture line, a loose flake, a thin place. You follow its attention, and you see a hairline split running across a block of chalk. It is not dramatic. It is just enough, because chalk does not need much encouragement. It only needs time and water and a reason to be pulled. The first proper light arrives as a thin band over the water, and now you can see the shingle strip below more clearly. Not sand, not a friendly beach. A belt of stones rounded From up here, it looks like a cushion, but you already know better. The stones are tools. The sea picks them up, sets them down, picks them up again, and never gets bored. You keep walking, and the ground under the grass changes. It is subtle, but your ankles notice. A firmer patch, then a softer patch, then another slight sag. These micro changes are the clifftop talking. Not in words, obviously, in texture, in the language of tension. A second crack appears, this one running parallel to the edge. It is wider than the first, and it has a little darkness in it. Soil has fallen into it, and you can smell that damp mineral scent. The crack is not the edge. It is the edge rehearsing. You crouch without thinking, and you put your fingertips near the split. The chalky soil stains your skin pale. It feels cool and slightly gritty, like flour with sand mixed in. You pull your hand back, and you see how easily it coats you. This whole place, this iconic wall, this national symbol, can become powder with barely any effort. The wind freshens again, and with it comes another sound. Not surf, not birds, a hollow thump far down the coast, followed by a faint, rolling rattle. It could be a rockfall. It could be cargo somewhere in the port, but your body treats it like a warning anyway, because you are standing on a margin. Margins do not owe you stability. You keep to the inland side of the path now, following where the grass is flattened. The detour bends around a patch of bare earth where someone has placed temporary tape. The tape is bright, cheerful, and completely unserious compared to the drop beside it. This is what human management looks like at the end of land. A thin plastic line and a hope that gravity reads signs. As dawn thickens, you begin to see the cliff face in full relief. It is not smooth. It is ribbed with faint vertical lines joints where the chalk prefers to split. Some joints are darker, wet from recent rain that soaked in and found an exit. Others are dry and pale, waiting for their turn. You think again about your question, the one you asked yourself a moment ago. What fails first? Hydraulic pressure or saturation along a marl layer? The honest answer is that the cliff is greedy. It fails in more than one way, whenever it can. The sea attacks from below. The rain and groundwater undermine from within. And gravity waits above, like a supervisor who never takes a day off. A thin drizzle begins, barely there, more like the air is testing you. The droplets don't fall straight. They arrive sideways, pushed inland by the wind, and you can feel what that means, not for your jacket, but for the cliff. Water does not have to be heavy to matter. It only has to arrive again and again. You follow the path toward a break in the fence, or a track leads down, a narrow route used by maintenance crews and the occasional determined walker. It descends toward the beach, toward the place where the cliff and the sea actually meet. The rim is dramatic, but it is not where the work is done. The work is done down there, at low tide, where waves can reach and retreat without the performance. You pause at the top of the descent, and you look down. The chalk face drops sheer, then slightly undercuts near the base. A shallow shadow line tells you the cliff foot has been nibbled inward. The cliff is not a straight slice, it is a shelf above a bite mark. And when the bite deepens enough, the shelf becomes an overhang. And when the overhang becomes too proud, it becomes a fall. The steps down are slick with damp, and you take them carefully. A wrong step here does not mean a twisted ankle and a funny story. It means sliding into the kind of angle where your body cannot correct itself. The wind funnels differently as you descend. At the top, it shoved you sideways. Here it swirls, confused by the cliff face, then punches upward in cold bursts. The air smells stronger now. More salt, more seaweed, and something else, a faint mineral freshness, chalk dust in the moisture. By the time your boots reach the shingle, the tide line is far out. The beach is wide enough to make you forget, briefly, that the sea always comes back. The stones shift under you with a dry crunch. Every step is a negotiation. You are walking on the cliff's leftovers. Flint nodules, dark and hard, mixed with lighter chalk fragments that will not survive long. Chalk does not like being handled by waves. It breaks, clouds the water, and leaves the flint behind like teeth after a meal. You turn and face the wall from below, and it changes your sense of scale. From the top, the drop was open space. From here, the cliff is a ceiling of potential. You can see the undercut clearly now, a shallow notch running along the base where wave energy has been concentrated. It is not a cave you can walk into. It is a hint of one, a beginning. You move closer, staying alert for anything falling. Even small pieces of chalk can cut and bruise when they arrive from above with enthusiasm. The cliff face is damp in streaks and dry in others. Some sections have a faint greenish tint near the base, where algae and spray cling. Other sections are clean white, bright even in the flat morning light. You run your eyes along a vertical joint, a natural crack, and it leads up into nothing you can reach. That joint is a weakness. It is also a channel. When the tide is high and waves slam into the base, air and water are forced into it. Hydraulic action, which is a clinical term for something that behaves like a battering ram. The sea does not just hit the cliff. It punches water into cracks, compressing air inside. Then it yanks back, and the pressure drops suddenly. That pressure change pries at the rock like a crowbar that never gets tired. You squat near the base, careful to keep your head turned up. You can hear the sea even at low tide, not crashing, not yet, but rolling and shifting over the outer stones. A constant industrial whisper. As you listen, you notice something on the beach that looks out of place. A cluster of flint pieces, fresh, sharp-edged, not yet rounded. They have not traveled far. They fell recently. That means the cliff has been shedding quietly while you are up on the path. Small failures are how big failures begin. They remove support. They expose fresh surfaces. They invite water into places that used to be sealed. You walk along the cliff base, keeping the undercut shadow line to your left. The chalk above you is pocked in places, little hollows where softer material has been preferentially removed. The word preferential makes it sound thoughtful. It is not thoughtful. It is just physics picking the easiest option every time. A wave arrives, even at this distance, and collapses over the shingle with a lazy slap. Then it retreats, and you hear stones dragging. That sound, that scraping pull, is abrasion. Sandpaper with a tide schedule. Each wave drags flint and sand along the base. It grinds at the chalk, scours it, and carries away the evidence. You find a patch where the cliff foot is unusually clean, almost polished, not smooth like marble, but smoothed compared to the jagged sections beside it. That is where the beach has been thin, where shingle did not pile up to protect the base, where the sea could reach farther in. Protection here is ironic. A beach is not a restful place. A beach is armor, made of loose parts. When storms rearrange those parts, the armor slips, and the cliff takes the hit. You look east along the shoreline and notice how the stones seem to grade in size. Larger pieces in one area, finer shingle in another. That is longshore drift at work, the sideways conveyor that moves sediment along the coast. Waves arrive at an angle, and each swash pushes material up and along. Each backwash pulls it down more directly. The net effect is a slow, sideways march, a moving sidewalk made of water. It carries the cliff away, piece by piece, toward other beaches, other problems. Your boots crunch over a band of darker stones, and you realize they are mostly flint. The chalk that once held them has dissolved and broken, leaving these stubborn pieces behind. Flint is the part of the cliff that refuses to be milked into the sea. It resists, so it becomes shingle. And then it becomes a tool used against the cliff that birthed it. Nature loves a closed loop. You stop beneath a section of face where flint nodules protrude like knuckles. Each nodule is a black oval in white chalk, glossy when wet. They look almost artificial, like someone embedded stones for decoration. They are not decoration. They are a record of chemical time. Silica migrating through the chalk long after the chalk was laid down, gathering and hardening. The cliff is not one simple material. It is a layered argument, and the sea prefers arguments with weak points. A thin, darker band runs horizontally across the face, subtle but continuous. It is marl, chalk mixed with more clay, a dirtier layer. a softer layer when wet, a layer that can become a slip plane if it saturates. You remember your question again, and now you can see one possible answer. If rainwater soaks down through porous chalk, it can perch on marl, it can build up, it can lubricate. Then the chalk above, heavier than it looks, can begin to slide. Not dramatically at first, just a millimeter. Then another. Then, one day, meters. A faint trickle line marks the face below that marl band. A damp stain after last night's rain. Water exiting slowly, as if the cliff is sweating. You watch that damp stain for longer than is socially acceptable, because it is evidence. It is the cliff admitting quietly that it is full of pathways. Rain goes in at the top like a rumor, then reappears down here as a fact. And every time it does, it changes the chalk by degrees, not by drama. You lean closer, careful, because the base is an active workplace. The seep line has collected a faint crust where dissolved calcium dries and rehardens. It looks like the cliff is trying to heal itself with the same material it is losing. Congratulations. You have found the world's slowest first aid kit. Above the seep, the chalk is slightly darker, heavier with water. Below it, the face is paler, drier, more brittle. That contrast is a map of where the cliff will decide to let go. Not today, probably, but the cliff is not required to warn you in advance. You take a few steps along the base, and the flint band continues like a dotted underline. Some nodules sit proud, resisting the chalk's retreat. Others have popped free, leaving oval holes like missing teeth. Each hole is a tiny increase in surface area, a new place for water to linger, a new place for frost to wedge when winter gets bored. You reach out and touch one flint nodule because you cannot help yourself. It is cold, smooth, almost waxy under the thin film of moisture. Chalk beside it feels like compacted dust, eager to become loose again. Two materials, one cliff, different personalities, and the boundary between them is where stress likes to gather. You look up, tracing a vertical joint that cuts through chalk and ignores the flint. The joint is a straight line in a world that prefers curves. It runs upward until it disappears into the grass line where you walked earlier. From down here, you finally understand what those cracks on the path meant. They were not random. They were the surface expression of this same fracture, reaching daylight. So the cliff is not failing in one place. It is failing as a connected system, top to bottom, like a tear in fabric. You listen again to the sea's low murmur out beyond the exposed flats. Low tide is the pause between punches. The cliff can breathe right now, if cliffs breathe, but the tide will return, and with it, pressure. And the cracks you are looking at are ready to be used. You walk on, keeping your distance from the undercut. The notch at the base is shallow, but it is continuous. A long hint. It is the sea's signature, written in negative space. Where the notch is deeper, the chalk above bulges outward slightly. That bulge is not strength, it is debt. Gravity keeps perfect records, and it will collect eventually. The beach under your boots shifts with each step, and you feel how unstable the ground is down here too. You are standing on a moving inventory of debris, constantly sorted by waves. Big storms throw it into ridges, then gentler tides comb it flat again. There is no final arrangement, only temporary storage. You follow the shingle line toward a spot where the chalk face changes texture. The surface becomes rougher, more blocky, with sharper edges. That is where pieces have detached along joints, leaving fresh planes behind. You can tell which surfaces are new by how bright they are. New chalk almost glows, like someone switched on a light inside it. Old chalk dulls and grays because the world touches it. Sea spray salts it. Rain stains it. Tiny organisms cling to it because life is opportunistic like that. You stop at a chunk of fallen chalk the size of a suitcase. It sits among flint like a dropped loaf of bread in a gravel driveway. It has fractured into plates and crumbs around its edges. Even down here on the beach, it is still being broken. The sea has not even reached it yet today, and it is already surrendering. You crouch and pick up a small piece, no bigger than your thumb. It leaves white dust on your skin instantly, as if it is eager to become part of you. You rub it between your fingers, and it collapses into powder. This is what the cliffs are made of. Not heroic stone, not stubborn granite, but the compressed remains of microscopic life. A wall built from bodies stacked for millions of years, now being unstacked by weather. You stand again and glance along the coast, eastward. The line of white continues, scalloped, interrupted by greener slopes where valleys cut down. Those valleys are not just scenic breaks. They are drainage lines, funnels for water, weaknesses in the rim. Each one is a place the land already agreed to be opened. You follow one valley with your eyes up to the top. You can picture rain flowing there, not as a stream, but as infiltration, disappearing into the chalk. Chalk is porous, like a dry sponge that pretends to be rock. Water sinks in quickly, carrying dissolved carbon dioxide from the air and soil. That makes a weak carbonic acid, gentle but persistent. It dissolves calcium carbonate slowly, widening pores, loosening grain boundaries. Not enough to make caves like limestone country usually, but enough to make the chalk less sure of itself. Enough to make joints wider, so the sea has more room to work. You take a slow breath, and you taste salt and a faint chalkiness. The cliff is already in the air, in tiny particles you do not notice until you do. You look down at your boots, now dusted pale around the laces. That dust is the cliff's future and its past in the same handful of powder. The tide is still out, but you can feel the day shifting. The wind has a slightly different bite now, less sleepy, more organized. Out on the flats, the waterline begins to thicken and creep inward. It does not rush. It advances like a confident person who knows you will move. You decide to start back because you know what high tide will do down here. You have seen enough coastlines to respect the schedule. The path up is steeper than it looked from above. Shingle slides onto you at first. Then the steps begin, damp and slick. You climb carefully, and with each step, the sound of the sea drops away behind the chalk wall. Instead, you hear wind again, louder as you rise, and you hear something else, faint, almost like dripping inside a cave. It is water moving through the cliff, exiting where it can. The cliff is not solid. It is a slow filter, carrying rain downward, storing it, releasing it. When you reach the top, the world opens wide again. The cliff edge is back in your peripheral vision, a bright line against darker sea. From up here, it is easy to forget the undercut, the seep lines, the missing flint nodules. It looks like a clean wall from a distance, but you have been underneath it now. You have seen the seams. You have seen how the cliff is built from weaknesses stitched together. You follow the fence line westward toward a viewpoint where people like to pretend they are safe. The ground is grass and chalky soil, thin over a body of white. Every few meters, the path is patched, rerouted, narrowed. Officially, it is maintenance. In reality, it is retreat, dressed up as landscaping. The wind rises as the morning turns toward midday. It is not a storm, not yet, but it has more weight. It pushes harder, and you have to lean into it slightly, like you are walking uphill. Down on the water, the surface darkens in patches, cat's paws of gusts. Whitecaps appear and vanish, practicing. You pass another sign, and it is more blunt than the last. Danger, cliff edge, unstable. Keep to designated path. It is a strange thing being told to stay on a line drawn on a moving surface. The designated path is a suggestion, not a contract. You stop where the fence juts outward, giving you a wider view of the face. From here, you can see several vertical joints running down like faint pencil marks. You can also see a horizontal line, darker, a marl seam cutting across. It is subtle, but once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. A weak layer, continuous, waiting to be lubricated again. You think about last night's rain. Not heavy, just steady. Enough to soak in, enough to load the chalk with water. Chalk can hold a lot, not as puddles, but as saturation in its pores. When it is dry, it is surprisingly strong for something so soft. When it is wet, it can behave like a different material entirely. It becomes heavier and less cohesive and more willing to slump. You watch the face for movement, and of course, you see none. Cliffs do not perform on command, but you can feel the tension anyway because you know what the geometry means. Undercut below, loaded above, cracks connecting top to bottom. It is an overhang with a timer that refuses to show you the numbers. The wind brings a thin burst of drizzle again, and it hits your cheek sideways. It is cold enough to feel sharp. You imagine those droplets landing on the grass, soaking into soil, then percolating down. Some will move quickly through the chalk because chalk is generous with water. Some will perch on a marl seam, held up like a tray. That perched water adds pressure, and it reduces friction along the seam. Then gravity does what it always wanted to do. It tries to flatten the edge, one slab at a time. A group of walkers passes behind you, chatting, laughing, living in the present. They keep to the fence mostly. One steps closer for a photo because humans are predictable. They want the void in the background to prove they were brave. You watch their feet, and you notice how the turf near the edge looks slightly different. It is more cracked, more patchy, as if the ground has been stressed. Small fissures run through it like dry skin. That is not just drought. That is the land stretching toward a future fall. The walkers move on, and you are alone again with the wind. You continue west, following the path as it bends around a section with newer fencing. The posts are fresh wood, not weathered. The wire is taut, recently installed. That tells you something happened here, and not long ago. A collapse? A slump? A scare that triggered paperwork? and contractors. The cliff teaches, and humans respond with carpentry. You reach a spot where the grass is torn and muddy, a scar on the path itself. The surface has been repaired with gravel, but the gravel is already sinking. The ground here is settling almost imperceptibly. It is the slow prelude that makes the sudden event possible. You stop and look out to sea, because sometimes it is easier to look at the horizon than at the edge. Ships move through the channel like indifferent insects, steady, purposeful. They follow lanes, because humans love lines. But the water beneath them is not a line. It is a thick, moving mass pushing tides in and out twice a day, forever. The Dover Strait is narrow enough to focus that motion. Water squeezes through, accelerated like breath through pursed lips. That means stronger currents, more energetic tides, more ability to move shingle. And where shingle moves, armor shifts. Where armor shifts, the cliff becomes exposed again. You turn back to the land and notice a subtle vibration, more felt than heard. At first, you assume it is a truck on a road somewhere inland. Then it happens again, a low, dull thud that seems to come from beneath your feet. The wind does not change. The birds do not react, at least not immediately. But your body reacts anyway, because it knows the sound of settling. The ground is not trembling like an earthquake. It is pulsing, like a heavy object shifting against resistance. You step away from the fence without thinking. One pace, then another. You look at the grass near the edge, and you see something that makes your throat tighten. A crack has widened, not by much, but by enough to notice. It runs parallel to the cliff, a clean split in turf. The side closer to the edge is slightly lower, as if it has begun to sag. This is the part where the earth pretends it is still deciding. It is not deciding. It decided long ago when the sea undercut the base and the rain loaded the seams. It is just carrying out the plan at a speed your senses can finally detect. The air feels different for a moment, as if pressure changed. Then you hear it, a deep internal groan, muffled by chalk and distance. It is not loud, it is worse than loud. It is the sound of mass letting go. You back up again. More deliberately now, you keep your eyes on the crack because it is the only honest line in the grass. A second crack branches off, angled slightly, connecting to the first. The turf between them becomes a rough polygon, a future slab outlined in black soil. Congratulations, you are watching the cliff draw its own boundary. The wind gusts, and for a second it carries a faint, dusty smell. Not soil, not seaweed. Chalk, freshly disturbed, like snapped plaster. Then the ground near the fence dips, just a few centimeters, and the fence wire slackens. The posts lean seaward. Not falling, just acknowledging gravity. It happens slowly enough to watch and fast enough to feel unreal. The slab is moving as a unit, pivoting toward the void. You can see the grass surface wrinkle slightly, like fabric sliding over a hard edge. A gull screams, sharp and offended, and lifts away from the face. Other birds follow, as if they got the message before you did. You take another step back, and now you are far enough to feel the difference. The air between you and the edge seems wider, like the space expanded. Then the slab goes not all at once, but in a sequence. First, a subtle drop, the kind of motion you see when a shelf bracket fails. Then, a slower tilt as the mass rotates along a hidden plane. The crack widens into a gap you could fit your hand into. Then, your forearm. You hear roots tearing, a wet, ripping sound, like Velcro pulled too slowly. And then the cliff reminds you that chalk can be silent, right up until it is not. The slab detaches fully. For half a second, it seems to hover, because your brain cannot process a landscape moving. Then it falls. The first part of the drop is quiet, because air is soft. The roar arrives a moment later, when chalk meets chalk and shatters. A bloom of white dust erupts upward from the face, rising like smoke from a demolition. It catches the wind and drifts inland, a pale veil across the grass. You taste it immediately, dry and mineral, like crushed shells, because that is exactly what it is. The sound continues, not one impact, but many. Blocks breaking, flint clattering, debris cascading down the slope in a chain reaction. It is like a bookshelf collapsing in slow motion, each shelf giving way to the next. You stand still because there is nothing useful you can do. Running does not make you faster than gravity. You simply keep distance and watch the edge change shape. When the dust thins, you can see the new face, a raw white scar, bright as paper, torn open where grass used to be. The cliff line has jumped inland by several meters in a few seconds, not eroded gradually, not softened politely, removed. The fence is gone where the slab took it. It did not bend, it did not argue. It simply ceased to be part of the topography. Below, on the beach, a new pile of debris has formed. From up here, it looks like a heap of sugar and black beads, chalk fragments and flint, already sorted by gravity before the sea even touches them. The dust cloud keeps moving inland, thinning as it spreads. It settles on your jacket, your sleeves, your eyelashes. You blink and you feel grit. The cliff has reached out and touched you, not with malice, just with physics. The wind carries the last of the falling noise away, and suddenly there is an unnerving quiet. The sea keeps going, of course. Traffic keeps murmuring inland, but the specific violence has finished, leaving only its result, and the result is so clean it looks fake. A new face, vertical, luminous, like a stage set. You walk closer again, but not too close, because you have learned something important. Collapses do not always happen alone. They can trigger others, like a zipper opening. Freshly exposed chalk dries unevenly, cracks, sheds. The new edge will adjust, sloughing off loose material for days or weeks. So you approach with respect, which is just fear with better manners. The ground near the new edge is fractured, messy. Turf has been torn into hanging strips. Soil is exposed, dark against the white chalk below, like a bruise. The air still smells faintly of dust, and the taste sits on your tongue. You look down the new face, and you can see the failure plane. It is not perfectly vertical. It stepped back along joints, then slid along a weaker layer. A mix of fracture and slump, cooperating. This answers your earlier question in the most unhelpful way. What fails first, the sea or the rain? Yes, the cliff used both. The sea undercut the base, creating an overhang. Rainwater saturated seams, reducing strength and increasing weight. Joints guided the break like perforations on paper. Then gravity cashed in. You stand there, breathing slowly, and you feel something like awe. Not the postcard awe of beauty, the practical awe of witnessing a boundary change in real time. Maps will not be updated today. Tourist photos will still show the old line for years. But the land does not care about documentation. It cares about stress and release. You turn away from the fresh edge and follow the path inland for a bit. You need space, not because you're emotional, but because your nervous system wants distance. Behind you, the scar remains bright, a new page in the cliff's book. And now you cannot stop imagining what is happening down on the beach. That new debris is sitting there, waiting. The next tide will arrive and start sorting it. Chalk will crumble and cloud the water like spilled milk. You picture that pale plume spreading through the shallows, and you realize the sea does not just erase cliffs, it also turns them into a liquid and delivers them somewhere else, like an unsolicited package. Down on the beach, the fresh pile will look stable for maybe an hour. Then the tide will arrive and start auditing every grain. The first waves will be small, almost polite. They will run up, hesitate, then pull back, dragging chalk, grit, and tiny flint chips. And the new debris will begin to separate by density, like a sorting hat with no mercy. Chalk goes first, because chalk cannot keep its shape once it is handled. It frays, it crumbles, it becomes a cloudy suspension in the water. Flint stays, because flint is stubborn in the way only silica can be. So the cliff's soft body turns to milk, and its hard bones become ammunition. You walk along the path again, but you keep your distance now. Your feet avoid the newest cracks automatically, like you have learned a new alphabet. And while you move, you keep glancing down toward that unseen beach. You are not being dramatic. You are being accurate, because the next high tide will not just wet the new rubble. It will pick through it, steal the small pieces, and leave the big ones exposed. And once the chalk is stripped away, the flint will be free to roll. It will clatter in the swash, and it will get rounded, and it will become part of the shingle belt. Which means the collapse you saw is not the end of anything. It is a supply delivery. You stop at another viewpoint, and you watch the sea surface darken in bands. The wind is still up, and it is scraping the water into a texture of moving wrinkles. Out in the shipping lane, a ferry slides past, bright and indifferent. It looks steady, like it belongs here. But you know the water under it is running hard through the strait. This narrow gap squeezes tides like breath through teeth. And that squeeze matters, because energy is a bully. It goes where it can do work. You lean on the fence, which is a bad habit on a good day. The posts creak, and you immediately stop leaning. Congratulations! You have remembered that humans build railings to comfort themselves, not to stop geology. The tide is coming in now, and you can tell by the sound. It is louder, more continuous, less like distant breathing, and more like machinery. The exposed flats are shrinking. The waterline is closer, and it is gathering itself for heavier contact. You imagine the waves finding the base notch again. Notching sounds gentle, like craft work. It is not gentle. It is undercutting, which is the sea's way of removing support while smiling. Hydraulic action will return to the same joints. Air will be forced in, compressed, then ripped out again. The cliff will feel those pressure pulses like knuckles in an old bruise. And abrasion will return too, because the shingle never calls in sick. It will grind at the foot and polish it and deepen that shadow line. The sea will do all of this without rising in anger, just rising because the moon says so. You take a slow breath and you taste salt and a faint chalk dryness. Your tongue feels like it has been dusted with a crushed vitamin. And then you realize something else that ruins the postcard version. The cliff does not only retreat when waves hit it, it also retreats when nothing happens, when the sky is calm and boring. Because chalk is not a locked vault. It is a sponge of calcium, full of pores, full of little passageways. Rain sinks in from above and vanishes like it never existed. Then it reappears days later, along seams at the face, as damp stains. The cliff is always moving water through itself, and water is always negotiating with calcium carbonate. One molecule at a time. It is not fast, but it is relentless. Which is worse? You walk inland a few steps, away from the edge, and the grass looks normal again. Too normal, which is how cliffs get you. The ground here seems stable because it is not yet scheduled for collapse. You glance back toward the raw white scar. Already, the brightness is changing, not by erosion you can see, but by weathering you can imagine. Spray will salt it. Rain will streak it. Algae spores will land and wait. And the face will dull because the world touches everything eventually. But for now, it is still clean enough to look new. It looks like the cliff is freshly built, which is funny because it was freshly destroyed. You follow the path westward again because you cannot help trying to make sense of it. Your brain wants a simple culprit. The sea did it. The rain did it. The truth is messier. And the cliff prefers messy because chalk fails when several small processes agree on a time. Undercut plus saturation, joints plus gravity, a thin marl seam that becomes slick at the wrong moment. And when they align, the cliff does not chip away. It resigns in a single slab. You pass another rerouted section of path where the grass is scarred by old footprints. The detour line curves inland like a timid animal, and you can tell it has been moved more than once. Older turf scars form a faint parallel, like abandoned lanes in a parking lot. This is managed retreat, but spoken in the language of footpaths. Nobody puts up a banner that says, "The land is leaving." They just move the fence and hope you do not notice. You notice because you are walking a coastline that is in the middle of a long goodbye. The wind shifts again and the drizzle stops, replaced by a cold clarity. The sky breaks in places and sunlight briefly touches the sea like a blade. The cliffs brighten, and you understand why painters and propagandists love them. They look pure, they look permanent, they look like a wall guarding a kingdom. But you have seen the dust, you have smelled the fresh break, you have watched a fence vanish like it was never real. So, the brightness is not comfort, it is exposure. The chalk is white because it is vulnerable, and because it keeps being freshly revealed. You slow down and let your mind step backward, away from today's collapse. Not because you are sentimental, because You are trying to understand why there is chalk here at all. Why this material, in this place, meeting the sea at this angle. A cliff is not just a rock face. It is a coincidence of supply and uplift and timing. And chalk is not the kind of rock that should be standing tall. Chalk should be buried, protected, ignored. Instead, it is up here, being punched twice a day. So you let the modern noise fade a little. You let the port behind you become a distant hum. And you try to imagine this place before it was an edge, before it was even land. You are still walking, but in your mind, the grass under your boots becomes water. Warm water, clear enough that sunlight reaches deep. The wind becomes something else, a soft, tropical breath. And Britain is not here where you know it. It is farther south, closer to the latitudes that now host lazy seas and bright reefs. The year is not a year in any useful sense. It is late Cretaceous, which means the planet is running a different program. Sea level is higher, ice is rare, the world is warmer, and the oceans spill over continents. And you are not standing on a cliff anymore. You are floating above a broad, shallow sea. A sea that feels calm and looks empty until you remember to look small. The water is crowded with microscopic life, coccolithophores, which is an ugly word for something that makes beautiful debris. They are tiny algae that build calcium carbonate plates around themselves, little shields, little coins, little skeletons made of chalk ingredients. They live, they drift, they photosynthesize in the sunlit zone. Then they die and their plates fall. Not in a dramatic rain, in a constant, slow snowfall of white flecks. If you reach your hand into the water in your imagination, it comes back clean. The plates are too small to see individually, but the collective effect is real, like dust accumulating on an unused shelf. Day after day, year after year, the dead plates sink. They settle on the sea floor in a soft blanket. A quiet accumulation that does not look like a future cliff. It looks like nothing. That is how geology starts most of its work. It starts as nothing you would bother photographing. The sea floor is flat and pale. Worms and small creatures stir the sediment. Storms disturb it sometimes, then it settles again. And the coccolith plates keep arriving because life keeps dying. The sediment thickens so slowly that no animal notices. No generation of anything sees the change. But the weight builds. Layer upon layer, the lower parts begin to compact. Water is squeezed out of the pores. The plates press together. The chemistry shifts, and the loose sediment begins to become rock. Not granite rock, not heroic basalt. A soft rock, fine-grained, porous, made of millions of tiny skeletons. Chalk is the opposite of dramatic. It is a mass grave that got tidy. And the whiteness that tourists love is just purity. Low clay, low impurities, a high percentage of calcium carbonate. A clean record of a warm sea that stayed stable long enough to build a thick stack. You imagine that stack growing meter by meter, but do not say meters. Say blankets. It is like someone laying down endless white sheets on the sea floor. And sometimes interruptions appear. A little more clay in the water, maybe from distant land. A thin marl seam forms, slightly darker, slightly weaker when wet. Those seams will matter later when this peaceful sea becomes a cliff with opinions. And there is another ingredient that will matter later too. Silica. Not from coccoliths, but from other marine organisms, sponges, and tiny plankton that use silica instead of carbonate. Their remains mix into the sediment. At first, it is scattered. Nothing special, but after burial, after compaction, chemistry begins to migrate. Silica dissolves and moves through pore water, searching for a place to settle. It gathers in zones, concentrates. It forms flint nodules inside the chalk, like black thoughts inside a white mind. This does not happen while the chalk is being laid down. It happens later, quietly, after the sediment is already on its way to becoming rock. So the cliff's embedded flint is not decoration. It is a chemical afterlife, a slow rearrangement inside a buried seafloor, long before waves ever touch it. You hold that image in your mind because it explains the cliff's secret structure. Chalk as soft archive, flint as hard punctuation, marl as slippery footnotes. The ingredients of future failure assembled in deep time with no intention at all. And now, the sea you are floating in is not the English Channel. There is no channel. There is a warm ocean covering much of what will one day be Europe. And the chalk layer you are imagining does not stop at Dover. It spreads wide because the conditions were wide. This same chalk continues under what will become the Channel. It reappears on the French side at Cap Blanc-Nez like a sentence broken by a later edit. So when you stand at Dover and stare at France on a clear day, you are not looking at another coast. You are looking at the other half of the same chalk sheet, a shared deposit later separated by water and politics and shipping lanes. The White Cliffs are not unique rock. They are a cut edge of a continuous layer, which means the cliff is not a monument. It is a cross-section. It is the planet showing you the inside of a buried sea. But buried sea floors do not become cliffs on their own. They need to be lifted. They need to be exposed. They need to be cracked like old paint. So you let the warm Cretaceous water fade, and you bring back the cold wind. You bring back the grass, the fence lines, the port noise, and you start looking for the mechanism that took chalk from seabed to skyline. The ground under Dover is not floating. It is part of a crust that has been pushed, pulled, flexed, and stressed. Not in one dramatic mountain building event here. More like a slow bend, a gentle uplift, a long memory of collisions elsewhere. Far to the south and east, plates collided and built the Alps. That collision sent compressional stresses outward, like ripples from a shopping cart crash in a parking lot. Two carts bump, and the whole line of carts shudders. Except here, the carts are continents, and the shudder takes millions of years. The chalk layers in southern Britain were gently folded and lifted, not crumpled into jagged peaks, just raised, tilted slightly, cracked as they adjusted. Those cracks are the joints you saw on the cliff face. They are not random fractures from one storm. They are structural weaknesses baked in by tectonic stress. So when you saw a slab detach along straight lines, you were watching ancient stress lines being used. The cliff did not invent a new failure. It followed old instructions. You walk past a patch where the grass is slightly sunken, a shallow trough. It might be an old path scar. It might be a drainage line. Or it might be subtle, settling along a joint running inland. You cannot be sure, which is the point. The land hides its cracks until it does not. And then you remember the other major editor of this coast. Ice. Not here as glaciers grinding the chalk directly, but ice ages as a global sea level machine. When ice sheets grew over northern regions, sea level fell. When they melted, sea level rose. Over and over, the shoreline moved. Not by a few polite steps, by miles. Across what is now seafloor. When sea level was lower, the area that is now the channel was land. Rivers crossed it, valleys were cut deeper, drainage networks formed where ships now travel. And when sea level rose again, those valleys flooded, becoming the drowned landscape of the seabed. The coastline did not just sit here and wait. It migrated back and forth, and each migration changed what the sea could reach. In cold phases, this place also faced freeze and thaw. Not alpine glaciers, but paraglacial conditions. Ground that freezes at night, thaws by day, repeatedly. Water in cracks expands when it freezes. It pries the chalk apart by tiny increments. Freeze-thaw sounds small, and it is small, one crack at a time. But it is persistent, and it turns joints into wider joints. It prepares the cliff like someone loosening screws before demolition. So by the time modern sea level stabilized, the chalk was already weakened, lifted, cracked, and pre-damaged by cold. All that remained was to put it in reach of waves, and the English Channel is not a gentle wave environment. It is a funnel. Storms from the Atlantic send long-period swell toward this corner. Winds in the channel build shorter, choppier waves that arrive with nasty timing, and the narrow strait concentrates tides and currents. So the chalk is not just exposed, it is exposed in a high-energy corridor, which is a polite way of saying the sea has leverage here. You stand again near the fresh scar, and you imagine the cliff not as a wall, but as a cut edge of a lifted sheet. You imagine the sheet extending under the water to France. You imagine the channel as scissors, slowly widening the cut. And then you remember something even more unsettling. This cut did not start as the channel you know. The separation of Britain from mainland Europe was not always complete. For a long time there was a chalk ridge connecting them, a land bridge, and then, at least twice, water overwhelmed it catastrophically. Not the daily tide, not a storm surge, a megaflood, a release of huge volumes of meltwater from ice-dammed lakes to the north. When ice sheets blocked drainage, water pooled. When the dam failed, the water did what water always wants to do. It found the lowest route, and it took it violently. The chalk ridge at the Dover Strait became a spillway. Fast water carved, plucked, and scoured. It ripped channels into the seabed. It helped turn a lowland into a strait. So the channel is not only a drowned river valley, it is also, in part, a flood scar. Britain's island status is not just sea level rise, it is also the memory of catastrophic drainage events. Congratulations, your national border has a disaster origin story. You look out at the calm shipping lanes again, and you try to hold that contrast. Today, the water moves in scheduled tides and manageable storms. In the past, Water moved like a released fist, and the geology of the seabed still remembers. Long grooves, deep channels, carved features that make no sense if you only imagine gentle waves. The cliff you are standing on is connected to that story, because without the strait, wave energy would be different, tides would be different, sediment pathways would be different. The cliff might still exist as a slope, inland, vegetated, less dramatic, but as it is, the strait focuses motion, and motion does work. You start walking toward Dover again, because the day is moving, and you are still in it. The light has shifted toward late afternoon, and the wind has steadied into a cooler push. The tide will be higher soon, and you want to see what humans do at the edge when they get nervous. As you approach the managed areas near the harbor, the landscape changes tone. The raw cliff line becomes interrupted. Concrete appears, rock armor appears, angular boulders placed like clenched fists at the base of slopes. Seawalls, groins, breakwaters, human geometry laid against coastal curves. You can feel the intention in it. Hold the line. Keep the land where it is. Protect the road. Protect the buildings. Protect the idea that a map is a promise. The defenses look strong because they are made of hard material and straight edges. But the sea does not care about aesthetics. It cares about energy and reflection and redirection. So it takes that hard geometry and it turns it into a physics problem. A seawall does not stop a wave. It tells the wave to come back harder. Where a natural shingle beach would absorb energy by shifting and grinding, a wall reflects it. The water slaps, rebounds, and scours the base like an angry mop. You walk closer to the managed stretch, and the sound changes first. The surf is no longer a soft, granular shush. It is a sharper crack, a hollow boom, water hitting concrete with no give. That noise is the coast admitting something you rarely hear in brochures. Hard defenses do not remove energy. They just decide where the energy gets to be a problem. You stop where blocks of armor stone sit piled at the foot of a slope. Each boulder is angular, foreign, and heavy enough to make you feel small. They are placed like a barricade against an enemy that arrives on a schedule. Some stones are stained dark with algae and diesel soot. Some are pale and fresh, meaning they were added later after something shifted again. You trace the line of these rocks with your eyes, and you notice how it ends, not with a neat closure, but with a transition back to unprotected cliff. And right there, where the hard engineering hands the coast back to chalk, the shoreline looks nervous. The beach narrows. The cliff face looks more scalloped. The sea has learned the edge of the armor, and it worries it like a loose thread. Congratulations, you have discovered the end effect. Protect one section, and the unprotected section becomes the new sacrifice. You keep walking, and the harbor infrastructure starts to crowd the view. Cranes, fences, lighting masts, stacked containers that look like giant bricks. The human urge here is obvious. Keep the port functioning. Keep the roads open. Keep the cliff from behaving like a cliff next to expensive things. But the coast does not understand expense. It understands forces and slopes and the availability of loose material. You look down at the beach again, and you watch the tide continue its slow advance. The water reaches the first line of stones, then climbs them, then slides back. Each retreat drags pebbles with it, and the pebbles rattle. That rattle is a kind of bookkeeping. Every clink is a grain moved a piece of the cliff exported, and the export does not go straight out to sea. It goes sideways along the coast because waves rarely arrive perfectly head-on here. They come at an angle, pushed by prevailing winds and the shape of the channel. So the swash runs up diagonally and the backwash runs down more directly. The result is a slow, sideways shuffle of everything loose. Longshore drift, which sounds like a gentle stroll. In reality, it is a conveyor belt that never stops. You watch a little tongue of water race up the beach, and you can almost see it push stones to the east. Not far, not dramatically, just enough that, given enough tides, the whole beach will walk away. That beach, the shingle belt that acts like armor for the chalk, is not guaranteed to stay put. It has to be supplied. It has to be replenished by collapses like the one you watched. And it has to survive storms that can strip it away in a night. Now add coastal defenses into that system and watch what happens. A groin, a wall that sticks out, traps sediment on one side. It makes the updrift beach wider and higher, which looks like success. But downdrift? The beach is starved. The conveyor belt is interrupted, and the coast beyond does not get its share of stones. So, downdrift cliffs lose their armor, and erosion accelerates there. The defense holds the line in one place and spends the budget somewhere else. You can feel that logic in the landscape if you keep walking. One stretch looks stable, broad beach, thick shingle, fewer fresh scars. Then, a little farther, the beach thins, the chalk foot is more exposed, and the cliff face looks newly edited. The coast is one system, but humans manage it like separate properties, and the sea is delighted by that misunderstanding. You pause at a section where the shoreline curves slightly, and you try to see the coast like a machine. Cliff supplies sediment. Sediment becomes beach. Beach protects cliff. Longshore drift exports sediment. Storms rearrange the stockpile. Defenses interrupt the flow. So the cliff either gets protected or it gets eaten faster, depending on where you stand. That is the part people hate. There is no fixed win. There is only shifting loss. You walk past a sign mounted to a fence near the managed edge. It explains, in careful language, that the coast is dynamic. It mentions maintenance, monitoring, and public safety. It does not mention the deeper truth. The cliff will retreat, and the only question is whether you let it do so honestly. Your boots find a patch of chalk dust on the path, blown inland from the collapse earlier. It has settled into little pockets in the grass like spilled flour. You step through it, and it puffs faintly. That is the cliff in transit, not as a dramatic fall, but as powder in the air, already leaving. You stop again where the view opens to the east, toward the longer stretch of white. On a clear day, this is where people look for France. They point, they squint, they take photos, and they feel the comfort of a visible neighbor. But tonight, you are not here for neighbors. You are here for gradients and currents, and the way a coastline migrates without signing anything. You watch the sea surface for a while, and you notice the currents near the harbor mouth. The water seems to fold and swirl, darker lines moving like slow muscles. Tidal flow here is not just in and out. It is squeezed, deflected by breakwaters, accelerated by the narrow strait. That matters because it moves sediment in pulses. A strong ebb can pull fine chalk slurry out and away before it settles. A strong flood can push shingle into new ridges and new gaps. So even without storms, the daily tide can rearrange the beach enough to change how the next wave attacks the cliff. The coast does not need a hurricane to make decisions. It can do it with mundane repetition. You keep moving, and the light begins to lower toward evening. The sun, when it appears through cloud breaks, hits the chalk at a shallow angle. It makes the cliff glow, and it makes the scars stand out. Older faces look gray and rough, stained by years of rain and salt. New faces look blindingly clean, like paper ripped from a notebook. The difference is not beauty. The difference is age, since exposure. A new face means recent retreat, which means this coast is not a relic, it is active. You find a bench set back from the edge, placed by someone who wanted you to sit and admire. You sit because your legs are human and because the view is a hypnotic kind of violence. From here, the sea is a wide, moving sheet. The ships are slow lights even in daylight, and the wind keeps combing the surface. Down below, the tide is now high enough that waves are reaching the base of the cliffs again. You cannot see the exact moment of impact from this distance, but you can hear the rhythm. A heavier rush, a slap, then the dragging rattle of stones, over and over. It is comforting in a bleak way, a schedule you can trust. While you sit, you try to imagine the fate of the debris from your collapse. The fresh pile down on the beach will be taking its first beating right now. Chalk blocks will fracture along their own micro cracks. Edges will crumble. Fine particles will be lifted into suspension, turning the water cloudy at the base. If you were down there, you would see the sea become pale, as if someone poured milk into it. That chalk milk will be carried by currents, diluted, dispersed, and eventually dropped as a thin dust somewhere else. Not back into a cliff, not into a neat layer, just into the sea floor as anonymous sediment. And the flint will remain, rolling, clicking, becoming rounder, becoming shingle, which means the collapse feeds the beach, and the beach feeds the erosion, and the coast stays in motion. You lean back on the bench and let your shoulders drop. The wind still presses, but you have stopped fighting it. And in that pause, you can feel the human side of the coast trying to keep up. Paths are moved inland, fences are replaced, warnings are updated, engineers add rock. All of it is a kind of negotiation with a partner that does not compromise. The sea does not bargain. It invoices, and the invoice arrives in multiple currencies. Wave impact at the base, rain saturation from above, freeze thaw in winter, sea level rise over decades, and storms that act like sudden audits. You look inland from the bench toward the rolling downs, soft green hills, farmland, hedgerows. It looks stable, civilized, but you know those hills are chalk too, extending back, thick and continuous. This cliff is just the cut edge of that chalk country. If the cliff retreats far enough, the landscape inland becomes the next edge. The downland is not separate from the cliffs. It is their future. A future trimmed by retreat, valley by valley. You stand again and walk along the inland side of the path, away from the newest edge. The air is cooling now, and the wind feels less like a shove and more like a constant cold hand. The tide noise continues below, steady and patient. You pass a stretch where the fence line bends sharply inland. The bend looks awkward, like a mistake. It is not a mistake. It is a scar in planning. A place where the old edge used to be before it left. You stop at that bend and look down, and you can see, faintly, the outline of older failure surfaces. Not one big collapse, but many small retreats over years. A stair-step pattern. Each step is a past event. Each event is a reminder that erosion here is episodic. Long, quiet periods, then sudden meters gone. That is what makes it dangerous. Humans prefer steady change because you can plan for it. Cliffs do not offer that courtesy. They wait until the geometry is wrong. Then they fix it all at once. You walk on, and you notice how the vegetation near the edge changes. The grass is shorter, more stressed, salted by spray. Small hardy plants cling in thin soils. Away from the edge, the grass thickens, greener, more confident. That gradient is another invisible map. It tells you how far the sea's influence reaches, not by water, but by aerosol, salt carried inland on wind, settling on leaves, stressing plants, altering soil chemistry. Even when the waves cannot reach the clifftop, the sea still reaches it. It arrives as salt, as dampness, as corrosion of tiny things. You find another sign, newer, with cleaner print. It shows a simplified diagram of cliff retreat. There is a line labeled present cliff edge and a shaded zone labeled unstable. The unstable zone is wider than you want it to be. It does not promise safety near the fence. It suggests uncertainty beyond it. This is the official version of what you already learned today. The edge is mobile, and mobility has implications. Somewhere inland, a road will eventually need moving. Somewhere, a drain line will be rerouted. Somewhere, someone will argue that it will be fine for their lifetime. And geology will listen politely, then keep working. As you walk, the sky begins to darken toward a bruised evening. Clouds thicken, and the sun loses its last sharpness. The cliffs, which looked bright in afternoon light, now start to flatten into a pale band. The sea becomes darker, and the shipping lane lights begin to matter more. Tiny points blinking and sliding, orderly, human, against a background that has never learned order. You slow down again, letting the evening pace take over. This is where people usually go home. This is where the landscape becomes less photogenic, less cooperative. But this is also where you can hear the coast better, because there is less distraction. The wind drops slightly, and the sound of waves becomes clearer. A repeated sequence, each wave hitting, running up, then pulling back with stones. That dragging sound is the coast writing. Every pull moves the sentence a little. You think about the defenses again, about their unintended consequences. A seawall reflects energy, increasing scour. Rock armor dissipates energy, but it also fixes the shoreline shape. Groins trap sediment, but starve beaches downdrift. Offshore breakwaters change wave patterns, sometimes encouraging deposition, sometimes causing rip currents that dig holes. Every intervention has a shadow, and the coast responds by finding the next weak point. That is why coastal management is often less about winning and more about choosing where you lose slowly. Managed retreat is the phrase that sounds calm enough for meetings. It means admitting that the edge will move and planning around that movement. It means moving the path inland before it collapses. It means letting certain stretches erode so that sediment can feed other stretches. It means accepting that a cliff made of chalk is not a fortress. It is a supply. You reach a spot where the path is newly graveled, and the grass beside it still shows the old line. The old line runs closer to the edge, now blocked by a low barrier. You stand at the barrier and look at the gap between old and new. It is not huge, but it is enough to feel like a confession. A few meters surrendered, not in war, but in policy. You can almost imagine the meeting notes: risk assessment, public access, cost of repair, projected retreat rates. The cliff, meanwhile, does not project, it simply continues. A colder gust comes in from the sea, and it carries dampness. Not rain yet, but the hint of it. Your jacket tightens around your shoulders as you zip it higher, and you think about what warmer winters and heavier rain mean here. Chalk is porous, which usually helps drainage. Water can soak in quickly, reducing surface runoff. That sounds good, until you remember the marl seams. Until you remember that perched water can build above a less permeable layer. When rainfall is heavier, the chalk can become more saturated overall. When winters are warmer, you get less hard freezing that locks water up as ice. Instead, you get more days where rain infiltrates and the ground stays wet. Wet chalk is heavier chalk. Wet seams are slicker seams. And more frequent saturation means more frequent slumps. Now add sea level rise, slow but relentless. When sea level rises, the wave attack zone rises with it. Waves start hitting slightly higher on the cliff face. They reach parts of the chalk that used to stay dry. They undercut at a higher elevation, which can destabilize larger blocks above. Even without stronger storms, simply lifting the waterline changes the geometry. It is like raising the blade on a saw and pretending it will cut the same way. You keep walking, and the managed stretches begin to thin out again. The concrete and armor stones fade behind you, and the cliff returns to its raw form. Here, there is less pretense. No neat walls, no geometric interruptions, just the white face, the dark seams, and the grass edge hovering above. You feel a strange relief. Not because it is safer, because it is honest. A natural cliff does not lie about what it is. It is temporary, and it knows it. You stop again and look down into the dimming air. The base is harder to see now, but you can still make out the darker strip where the tide reaches. You can hear more than you can see. A heavier impact now, because the tide is higher. The waves are reaching the notch, pushing air into joints, pulling it back out. Hydraulic action continues in the dark, invisible, like a tool working under a blanket. The cliff is being loosened for future collapses you will not witness. You turn your head inland and listen for human noise. The port hum is still there, faint. A road somewhere, a distant engine, and you realize how thin the human layer is here. A few lights, a few fences, a few paths. The rest is chalk and water and gravity. That is why the place feels both iconic and indifferent. The cliffs are famous, but fame does not change their chemistry. You walk until the sky is mostly dark and the sea becomes a single moving mass. Navigation lights blink offshore, red and white, timed and calm. On the cliff face, You can no longer see details, only shape. But the new scar from the collapse is still faintly visible, paler than the surrounding darkness. A fresh surface catches what little light remains and refuses to disappear completely. You find a spot set back from the edge where the ground feels more stable. Not stable in a moral sense, just less cracked. You sit again, on the grass this time, and you let the sound of the surf become your main sense. The waves below fold over stones with that unhurried, industrial sound, like a machine that does not need supervision. And in the dark, the collapse you saw earlier stops feeling exceptional. It becomes one punctuation mark in a long paragraph. The cliff has been doing this for thousands of years, and it will keep doing it. The only difference is whether humans are paying attention when it happens. You picture the cliff line retreating not as a smooth fade, but as a series of leaps, weeks of nothing, months of minor rock falls and pebbles ticking down. Then, one day, a slab outlines itself in the grass and drops. The retreat is irregular, but the direction is consistent. Inland, always inland. You shift your weight on the grass and feel the ground give slightly under you. Not collapsing, chalk soil is a strange thing. It holds shape when dry and then turns fragile when wet. It can support a path until it cannot. The edge is not a line, it is a zone. And tonight, in the dark, you can feel that zone more than you can see it. You listen for falling stones, for the tick-tick that announces small failures. You hear none, which means nothing, because the cliff does not perform on request. Instead, you hear the steady return of waves, and you think about the debris below. A tide does not care that it is late evening. It arrives anyway, like a worker clocking in. Sleeves already rolled. You picture the fresh rubble pile getting its first real inspection. Not a wave, not a splash, but a methodical rummaging through everything that fell. The first swash lifts the smallest chalk grains. It holds them briefly, then drags them outward, milky and anonymous. The next swash knocks two flints together, and the click carries up faintly. That sound is the cliff being converted into a different kind of coastline. Soft turns to slurry, hard turns to shingle, and shingle turns into a tool the sea can reuse. You sit with that thought because it makes the whole place feel less like a landmark, more like a factory line. Raw material comes in from the top, gets processed at the bottom, and ships out sideways. And in that factory, your collapse is not a catastrophe. It is restocking. You shift your gaze along the dark edge where cliff meets sky. You cannot see the joints now, but you can remember them. Straight seams like tear lines in paper, and you remember the fence disappearing like it never belonged to the planet. That memory is an anchor, and it changes how you hear the surf. Each wave sounds less romantic now, more like a repetitive tool, tapping a chisel over and over. You stand, slowly, because you do not want to be surprised by your own legs. Your knees complain in the quiet way knees do, as if they also had a long day. You take a few careful steps inland, away from the unseen rim, not because you are afraid of the dark, because you respect how little warning chalk gives when it decides to move. The grass under your boots feels springy at first. Then you find a patch that feels slightly hollow, like compacted dust. it is probably nothing, which is exactly how cliffs get to keep their reputation. You stop and listen again, not for falling stones, but for the deeper rhythm. The tide is fully in now, and the impacts have a heavier cadence. The waves are reaching the cliff foot, and the beach is shorter. That means less room for energy to dissipate. The sea has a better angle, and it knows it. You imagine water slamming into the notch you saw earlier. Air gets forced into cracks, compressed, then snapped back out. Hydraulic action, a neat term for an ugly trick. It is like blowing into a straw, then ripping it away and repeating forever. And when the wave withdraws, it does not leave politely. It drags stones, sand, and chalk paste back with it. That backwash is not retreat. It is theft. It is taking the cliff apart in handfuls too small to mourn. You take another step inland and let your shoulders drop. Your breathing slows and the wind becomes background again. Night makes the world simpler. It hides the details, but it does not stop the processes. If anything, it makes them feel more honest. No one is here to clap for the scenery. No one is here to pretend permanence. There is just the coast continuing, and somewhere down there, the new debris is already being sorted by density. You let that image sit for a while. Then you start walking again. Not along the edge now, along the human version of safety, set back with careful optimism. The path is quieter at night, and the emptiness feels like permission. You can think without tripping over other people's conversations. As you move, you pass another rerouted bend where old grass scars run parallel. Those ghost lines tell you the story of retreat without numbers. Each abandoned track is a former confidence. Each new track is an admission. Managed retreat is not one decision. It is a series of small retreats, a little surrender, then another, spaced out by budgets and arguments. You try to imagine the committee meeting that made that bend. Someone with a map, drawing a new line inland, someone else insisting the old line held for decades. Someone quietly mentioning the collapse rates and the insurance problem. And outside that meeting room, the tide keeps arriving like it always did. The coastline does not attend hearings. It makes its own. You reach a section where the fence is newer again. Fresh posts, clean wire, reflective markers that catch your headlamp beam. These markers are not for beauty. They're there because people walk here in low light and misjudge distance. They step toward the void because the night makes the drop invisible. Congregations, you have discovered another job for fences. They are not to stop cliffs. They are to stop humans from forgetting cliffs exist. You pause and look out to sea again. The shipping lights blink in slow patterns, red and green and white. They look calm, like a metronome. But the water they sit on is restless, running hard through the strait. That strait is narrow enough to accelerate flow. Tides here do not just rise and fall. They move sideways with purpose. It is a throat, and the sea is breathing through it. That breathing is why sediment does not stay where it falls. The cliff can collapse straight down, but its remains do not stay put. Fines get pulled into suspension and exported. Pebbles get rolled and marched along shore. Even the flint, that seems so stubborn, eventually becomes a traveler. You think about a single flint nodule. once locked inside chalk, it spent millions of years in darkness, surrounded by white. Then it got exposed by erosion, popped free, and fell. Now it is on a beach, being rolled until its sharpness is gone. In a few more years, it will be part of a shingle ridge. In a few more storms, it might be moved east, then east again. And if it ends up trapped behind a groin, humans will call it beach stability. If it ends up stripped away from a cliff foot, humans will call it erosion. Same stone, different paperwork. You keep walking, and the managed defenses come back into view ahead. Dark shapes against darker water. Armor stones stacked where the harbor needs them. It is a strange comfort, seeing hard edges in the dark, not because they are stronger than the sea, because they make the conflict visible. Here is what humans fear, and here is how they try to brace it. You walk closer, and the sound changes again. Waves slap rock and concrete, and the impact is sharper than on shingle. A shingle beach absorbs energy by moving. A wall refuses to move, so the wave has to. It rebounds, churns, and scours at the base. That scouring is a quiet sabotage. It digs a deeper water pocket in front of the wall. A deeper pocket lets larger waves reach it without breaking early. So the wall gets hit harder over time because it insisted on being there. The sea loves an argument like that. You stand near the armor stones and watch the water surge through gaps. It funnels, accelerates, then sucks back out. You can hear stones clacking under the surface. Even here, even under engineered protection, the coast is mobile. It is just mobile in ways that are harder to photograph. You take a slow breath and taste diesel faintly now, mixed with salt. Ports have their own smell, a blend of fuel and wet metal. It reminds you that human time is layered over geological time. Schedules, deliveries, shift changes, all happening on land that is literally leaving. You look along the line where defenses stop and raw cliff begins again. The transition is never subtle. It is like a stitched seam between two fabrics that stretch differently. On the defended side, the shoreline is fixed, more or less. On the undefended side, it is allowed to respond naturally, so the waves refract around the end of the defense. Energy gets focused there, and the cliff nearby pays extra. This is how you create a hotspot without meaning to. You solve a problem for one stretch and rent it out to the next. You turn away from the harbor and walk back toward the darker, quieter stretch. Not because you hate engineering, because you want to feel the coast without the human mask. The raw cliff does not pretend the line will hold. It just stands there and waits for the next correction. The path leads you back into open darkness, away from the bright port lights. Here, the night is thicker. The cliff becomes a pale suggestion again, and the sky is a heavy lid. You slow down because your eyes need time, and in that slower pace, your mind starts doing what minds do at night. It runs scenarios. It imagines tomorrow, not the weather forecast, the geometry forecast. You imagine heavier rain in winter, more saturation, more seep lines, more perched water on marl. You imagine sea level rising by small increments that feel insulting. A little higher waterline means waves hit a little higher, which means undercutting begins at a higher elevation, which means the overhang that forms is larger, heavier, and more eager to fall. And you imagine storms that arrive out of season. A warm winter storm pushing long swells into the channel, stripping the shingle beach away in a single night, leaving the chalk foot exposed at the exact moment it is most saturated. That combination is not a theory. It is a recipe. You have watched enough coasts to know how recipes end. The cliff does not erode steadily like a candle. It holds, then it goes. And when it goes, it delivers another pile of debris to the beach. And the beach, briefly armored, might protect the next section until longshore drift carries that armor away, which means erosion is not just destruction. It is also supply chain management, run by waves. You stop again, set back from the edge, and let the sound of surf take over. It is steady, repetitive, almost hypnotic now. There is something soothing about a force that does not improvise. It just repeats. Humans are the ones who panic because humans keep building permanent things on temporary margins. Roads, houses, fences, viewpoints. Then acting betrayed when the margin behaves like a margin. You think about the chalk itself again because it is easy to blame the sea. But chalk is complicit. Chalk is porous, fine-grained, and eager to dissolve. Rainwater picks up CO2 in soil, becomes weak acid, and starts nibbling. Not dramatic dissolution, but enough to loosen bonds, enough to widen pores, reduce cohesion, and carry ions away. So even when waves are calm, the cliff is being softened from within. You can imagine the cliff top after a week of rain. Water sinks in fast because chalk drinks. The surface looks dry again quickly, and that fools people. But inside, the pores are full. Weight increases, friction decreases along marl. Then the next sunny day arrives and nothing looks wrong. Congratulations, you have discovered how saturation hides behind good weather. A cliff can fail on a bright afternoon, not because the sun did anything, but because the water from last week finally found the right seam. You take another step and you feel your boot scrape chalky gravel on the path. This is not beach shingle. This is maintenance material, brought in to stabilize the walkway surface. It crunches differently than natural chalk soil. It is a human attempt to make the path less slippery, less erodible. And it works in a narrow sense. It keeps your foot from sliding. It does not keep the ground beneath the path from moving inland. The path can be stable and doomed at the same time. That is a useful lesson if you are the kind of creature who builds on edges. You follow the path until it bends slightly, and the wind shifts with it. For a moment, the breeze is blocked, and the surf noise becomes clearer. You can hear individual sets now, a larger wave, then smaller ones. The sea does not arrive as a constant. It arrives as pulses, like breathing with occasional sighs. Those larger pulses are the ones that do most of the work. They push farther into notches. They lift larger stones. They compress more air into joints. Most waves are just shuffling the beach. Some waves are writing the next crack into the cliff. You look at the grass and try to see those cracks, even in the dark. You cannot, but you know they are there, running inland, invisible. And you know the cliff top is not a clean boundary. It is a slab system, blocks separated by joints, each block waiting for a trigger. That trigger could be undercutting, it could be saturation, it could be freeze-thaw, it could be nothing obvious at all, just the slow accumulation of tiny changes. You feel an urge to move farther inland, not from fear, but from instinct. So you do. You walk until the sea is still audible but less immediate, and as you walk, the ground begins to feel more consistent, less hollow, less stressed. This is what retreat looks like from a human perspective. You move back until the land feels honest again. The cliff, meanwhile, will move back too, eventually, but on its own schedule. You pause and look over your shoulder at the pale band in the dark. That band is iconic, yes, but icon is a human word. The cliff's real identity is process. It is being made and destroyed at once. Fresh faces appear only because old faces failed, and those fresh faces will weather, dull, and crack. Then they will fail, and new faces will appear again. A cliff made of chalk is a self-refreshing scar. You start walking again, and you let your thoughts drop down the cliff face, down into the water, because the story is not only on land. The evidence is being exported into the channel right now. Chalk slurry disperses into currents, and it does not vanish. It settles in quieter zones, in thin layers, mixed with other sediments. Some of it might end up in estuaries, some in deeper patches where fine material accumulates. The coast is shedding and the sea is receiving. This is how coastlines talk to seafloors, not with words, but with sediment. Every collapse adds a little more calcium carbonate to the system. Every storm moves shingle ridges, reshaping beaches, and the channel keeps a memory of it all in its seabed. You imagine that seabed as a map of past violence, scoured channels from ancient floods, sand waves shaped by strong tidal currents, patches of gravel where fine material is swept away, and thin drapes of chalky mud where water slows enough to drop its milk. The seabed is not flat and dead. It is a landscape too, carved by moving water. Just like the cliffs, your mind drifts because night invites drifting, and you catch yourself thinking of the cliff not as land, but as a temporary bank account. Chalk stored for millions of years, now being spent in daily withdrawals. Each wave takes a little, each rainstorm loosens a little. Each collapse is a large transaction. Humans keep trying to freeze the account, to stop the withdrawals, but the account is not theirs. It belongs to physics. And physics does not do customer service. You stop walking and stand still again, letting the wind press your jacket. The air is colder now, and dampness has returned. Not rain yet, but a misty thickness. This is how the sea reaches inland, even without waves. Salt aerosols drift up, settle on grass, on soil, on fences. Salt can change the way water behaves on surfaces. It can increase moisture retention, keep things damp longer. It can also stress vegetation, thinning roots that might otherwise hold soil together. Even plants are part of the stability equation here. Not because roots can hold up a cliff, but because roots can hold a little soil, slow a little runoff, reduce tiny erosions at the top. When vegetation is stressed by salt and wind, the top edge becomes more vulnerable. Small changes matter because the cliff is already compromised. You think about how people describe this place. They call it timeless. They call it ancient. They call it enduring. And all of that is true in the way a bruise is enduring. It lasts a long time, but it is still a wound. The cliff endures as long as the processes that destroy it keep operating, which is a bleak kind of stability. a stable rate of loss, a stable direction of retreat, a stable schedule of tides that never asked permission. You take a few more steps, then stop where the path widens. Here, the ground feels more solid, and you can stand without that subtle cliff-top tension. You let your body relax into it, and you realize how much effort the edge demanded. Even when nothing happened, your nervous system stayed alert. Now, set back, you can think more clearly. And clear thinking leads you back to the most annoying truth of coastal defense. You cannot stop erosion on a soft coast forever. You can only manage how it happens and where. Rock armor can buy time for infrastructure. Seawalls can protect a specific asset for a while. Beach nourishment can rebuild armor temporarily if you keep paying. Groins can trap sediment if you accept that someone downdrift will lose. Every measure is a trade, and the sea will collect on that trade eventually. You think about the word defend. It implies an enemy with intent. The sea does not intend anything. It just moves energy. Defending against it is like defending against gravity. You can do it locally, temporarily, at a cost. But the force remains. Patient. And patience is a geological superpower. You stand there long enough that the tide rhythm becomes almost comforting again. It is consistent, like a clock. And you realize the cliff is also a clock, just slower. The joints are minute hands. The marl seams are weak hours. The collapses are loud chimes you only hear sometimes. Most of the time, the clock is ticking in powder, in seepage, in tiny grains moving underwater. You turn your head slightly and catch a faint white smear on your sleeve. Chalk dust from earlier, still there. It has not brushed off completely. It clings because the particles are fine and dry. It is a reminder you can carry away, whether you want to or not. You rub it with your thumb and it smears like flour. That